I call this meeting to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, will the clerk please take attendance?
Mayor and council members, Councilmember Tilton Byrne is on her way. She'll be arriving late.
Thank you. Item 3 is approval of the agenda. Entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, will the city clerk please call the roll?
Avery,
Aye.
Bacon,
Aye.
Brink,
Aye.
Collins,
Aye.
Niemeyer,
Aye.
Wendell.
Aye.
Okay, is there any member from the public who wish to address the council on an item not listed on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item of business. Workforce Housing Project, 15th Street South and 7th Avenue South. Mike Struck, our Community Development Director, will introduce this item.
Council, we're here tonight to give an update on the workforce housing project on 15th Street South and 7th Avenue South. If you may recall, a few years ago, we went through letters of interest, requests for qualifications, and all led to a request for proposals. And we received 3 proposals, reviewed those, scored those, provided a recommendation, and eventually the team of Clark Drew Construction was selected to proceed forward. We had a few hiccups along the way. We needed to get the infrastructure in place on 15th Street South and 7th Avenue South. That began this past summer. Some of the infrastructure has been put in place. The rest of it will be completed this upcoming construction season. And so now we wanted to get back and forth before you and kind of give you an update where we are with this housing project. And eventually we have to work towards some sort of an agreement with the selected development team on this project so that they can move forward. James Drew is a representative of that particular development company. He's in the audience tonight and may be able to answer any questions specific to the project that you have. But I'll just go over a couple of highlights of it so far. This is even further back is the city acquired a larger parcel of property from the Costello company who owned they manage and own the apartments directly to the west. North of the 15th Street right away is a city stormwater detention facility that has been constructed, and then we'll complete the infrastructure and street improvements for 15th Street South, which will connect from Main all the way over to Madera, and then 7th Avenue South will eventually provide that connection from 20th Street South all the way up to 12th Street South. The yellow highlighted area is land that was not needed for the project, essentially being surplus property, and we'd like to get it back on the tax rolls and provide a benefit to the community, and we felt this workforce housing project was a great opportunity there. This was a conceptual design that was provided as part of the RFP process. What was really interesting to the city is minimizing the curb cuts directly onto 15th Street South. So it allowed with this concept to maintain that flow of traffic on 15th. Basically, they're asking for 2 access points on the east and west ends of the project. And looking at home ownership opportunities, the units would have access to garages, and you kind of have that little loop road around the backside, and just minimizing those traffic and curb cut conflicts along the 15th Street South. In this particular example, they're looking at a total of 18 units, range anywhere from 2 to 3 bedrooms, single story, 2 stories. And like I mentioned, everything would have an attached garage, and then there's also parking in the driveway. Now, with this concept and talking with with the developer. Things may change a little bit based upon some of the things that's happened in the construction industry over the last few years. They may look at trying to get an additional unit or two, maybe consolidate some of the buildings, just to try and gain some efficiencies, get some more units into the overall mix. So this was a conceptual, and so things are still maybe a little subject to change until we actually get to construction. This is, kind of what the exterior elevations of a typical structure would look like with that concept plan, and you can see the one on my left, kind of in the yellowish brown, is actually a triplex, 3 different units, and then the typical twin home to the right, 2 units showing different access points, main access points. So nice design features for the neighborhood. One of the things that the developer is looking at is taking advantage of the South Dakota Housing Opportunity Fund through the South Dakota Housing Development Authority. With that program, the plan was provided in your packet. A lot of detail, a lot of information, I think 50-some pages of information, but I tried to pull out some of the highlights out of the home ownership opportunities. So eligible costs can include land, building acquisition, although in this particular scenario, it's undeveloped land, but site improvements, utility connections, and a potential development subsidy if there's a difference in the appraised price and the sale price of the home. For qualifications for the home buyers, it has to be their principal residence, and they have to go through a home buyer education program. And there are some of those programs available here in Brookings. Selling price is capped at the appraised value. And then there's a period of affordability. And this is something I want to bring to your attention. And so this is basically when you look at that $15,000 amount, if it's less than $15,000, that's kind of that development subsidy on a per unit basis. Then the period of affordability is deed restricted for 5 years. If it's over $15,000, they put a deed restriction on it for 10 years. And then that's to try and ensure that through the South Dakota Housing Development Authority, that period of affordability for those units remains for that length of time. And so there's a formula that the Housing Authority has in place that if somebody were to sell it, they go through that formula, and there's only so much that they can really realize in gains. Otherwise, they have to reimburse the program back. So it's a deed restriction that the South Dakota Housing Development Authority puts on the unit. It's filed, and it's really there to try and ensure that for a certain number of years, it remains affordable for any potential home buyers. This is the income targets for 80% of the area median income for Brookings County. So you can look at the number of bedrooms, the square footage that they consider for a home with those bedrooms, and then the price points. And so this project was looking at some 2 and 3 bedrooms, so they'd be looking at that 750 to 900 square foot range for a home or a unit, and price range would range somewhere in the $171,000 to $202,000. There is a pretty lengthy application process that the developer would need to go through. It's specific criteria. It's a scoring system. They have to reach so many points to be even eligible for that Housing Opportunity Fund. And then in addition to that, there's the other standard requirements of the Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, the lead-based paint, conflict of interest, debarment, and suspension. I provided the link there in case anybody wanted to, read up more about that South Dakota Housing Opportunity Fund to see what's available. But, with that, that's pretty much the end part of mine. Some potential next steps that we've got to work towards is, it's going to move forward is transferring of the land in the application process. It's to the developer's benefit to have ownership of the land. It helps in the scoring criteria. It gets bonus points for having control of the land. And so what does that look like for the city? How do we accomplish that? What is an agreed upon amount that the city's comfortable with transferring the land? What sort of clawbacks, stipulations were to be placed on that? After reviewing the Housing Opportunity Fund, I feel that a lot of the questions that the city would have or would be interested in are addressed with that. In particular, really trying to maintain that period of affordability and making sure that somebody doesn't get into a unit at potentially a discounted price and then turn around and flip it in a couple of years and make a huge profit. And that's part of the reason why the Housing Authority puts that deed restriction on, is to make sure that those price points stay manageable to the market conditions, acknowledging that, the longer you stay in that particular unit, you should be able to realize some gains, some equity. But at the same time, the program is geared to trying to address some of the housing issues that we face across the state of South Dakota. So with that, I guess I would open it up for any questions you would have.
Thank you, Mike. Council questions? Wendell?
Thank you, Mayor. 5, and I was hoping you could just help us unpack the 80% area median income number and how we arrived at those cost breakdowns. Was that linked to
That criteria is
income
set
and-
by the South Dakota. They have, not to interrupt
go
Councilmember
ahead.
Wendell, but they have certain counties that they qualify. It's right in their program requirements. These counties, this is 80% area median income. This is the square footage. This is the price points. And then there's other counties. It's broken down into somewhat different regions of the state. The price points in some more distressed counties are a little bit lower. And then, as you can imagine, in growing areas, in metro areas, those price points are a little bit higher. But that criteria is all set by the South Dakota Housing Development Authority.
that was my primary question, if it was Brookings specific or if it was standard for the state, or it sounds like not Brookings specific, but specific to counties with our demographic makeup and income level. And
Yeah, and so I can't remember all the counties that fall within the Brookings region, but it differs from like Minnehaha, Lincoln County, the Sioux Falls metro area. So, and then obviously significantly different from some areas in central South Dakota.
thank you.
On that same slide, just a follow-up question, the number for the home, not the income level of the household, correct?
Correct. That's the price points for the homes, the units.
Leah?
Through that years of affordability in the $15,000 caps, and I don't quite understand what that is referring to, or what that 15,000 refers to.
Okay, so there's opportunities for a development subsidy. And so it could be to the developer, could be directly to the home. That subsidy amount is less than $15,000. Then the South Dakota Housing Development Authority puts a deed restriction on that unit for a period of 5 years. And if it's the subsidy is more than $15,000, then that deed restriction is placed on that unit for 10 years. And then the Housing Development Authority has a formula so that, let's say if you were to sell it in year 7, you go through and you receive more than $15,000 in subsidy for that particular unit. There's a formula that would go through that would say is you can only sell it for this particular price, and that it still has to remain somewhat affordable for the remaining 3 years of that deed restriction.
How or when does that subsidy amount get designated?
A pretty complex application process where they go through and they determine how much either the developer or the individual home buyer would qualify for a subsidy. In this particular case, it's probably going to be the developer to help subsidize the overall development project so that they can try and keep those price points at the restrictions. And so, there's not only is it just the actual construction cost, but your site improvement costs, your soft costs, carrying costs, marketing costs, all of those are eligible expenses. And so all of a sudden those numbers start to really creep upwards. And so the Housing Opportunity Program is available to help minimize some of those costs to the end user, the home buyer. And so that's through this subsidy per se.
So it's the state entity that would eventually determine that subsidy through the developer's process here.
Yes, through the application process
Okay.
and how much they are willing to put towards the project.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to of this project, and not only about the affordability of it, but if you go to the slide that showed the mock-up, I think this one here, I think there are some elements for a community like this. The things that I am noting would be the playground and the garden plots. I think that not only creating a space that is affordable, but also has some of those livable amenities is really a great idea and creates more of a draw for a community like this. And so I'm excited to see those elements in here as well.
I think all of you are aware that this is something I've been working on for a very long time. And when James and his team came forward with this design, it was by far better than any of the other designs we received. If you look at the front elevation, this is not going to look like row houses or apartments. These families a sense of ownership in something they can be very proud of, and not just some form of subsidized housing. So it's been a long time coming, but I am so thrilled. Do we have any idea on groundbreaking? Are you hoping this spring when weather?
We won't really be able to go to the groundbreaking until the infrastructure is completed. There's still, I believe, some water lines that need to go in. There's some curb. We need the curb so we can establish the elevations for the homes themselves. So, I can't speak to the developer on a time frame. We were just talking before the meeting. We're going to try and get together with a conference call Zoom meeting with the staff at the Housing Development Authority next week to try and work through some of the questions that we may have from the city's perspective, the developer's perspective, and can we move an application along, because it is kind of in that application period right now. So,
Well, I know that they will be very helpful. They always have in the past, South Dakota Housing. But I'm also thrilled that we'll be able to use the Housing Opportunities Fund. That is a fund that I helped create and was recognized nationally for doing. And the fact that we're going to be able to use that funding here in our community makes it even more exciting, because that will show that an example of how it can be done, how the money can be utilized in a very effective way. So I thank you and James and everyone that's worked on this, and can't wait to see it completed.
Okay. Councilmember
That's okay.
Joey, go ahead.
Thanks, Hope. Thanks, thanks for putting this presentation together, Mike. It's really informative. It goes a long way. I just had one question, and maybe I missed this or something. But do these come with a garage?
yes. So the garages are actually on the backside proposed. So the loop road comes around, and you can see the driveways going in. They'll lead to the garage, and then it also provides parking in the driveway.
That's for the garage. Okay.
Yep, the garages will really be on the backside. And that was important from a city staff perspective. Amount of curb cuts coming directly onto the street. And so with this particular concept, there's really only 2 access points. We could still allow for some on-street parking for overflow if you have guests, visitors. There's also a little bit potential of some optional parking as well. I think there's maybe 8 to 10 spots back there as well. So
Okay.
this, early early conversations is this would be created into like an association for the exterior maintenance, so that your snow removal, your mowing, all of that is done at one time, so it's consistent, it's taken care of, so it'll look nice. And so those are some of the things that we've been discussing and working through with the developer.
Okay. Maybe this is a good one for James. From the original design, what are we looking at a price increase percentage? What it was when you originally proposed this, and what are we looking at now?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. Yeah, that's a valid question. We know the unit prices for homes in a typical market conditions are up 30 to 40% over the last year, so it's significant. We've talked with South Dakota Housing Authority Fund, and it's interesting that this spring, I think there's some bills in front of legislature out in Pierre to try to align some of those cost increases with the increases that we've seen in inflation on homes. So admittedly, we were pretty tight before, and we're even tighter now. So we haven't worked all the way through all those items. We're still optimistic that we're going to be able to make this thing work, or this project work. But until we work through that with South Dakota Housing Authority, we have to update our budgets for the project and then make sure that it can move forward.
Okay, and then so will the units be completed before they're offered for sale, or can obviously
Our
we don't
intent
want
would
to
be-
change things, but on the flip side, maybe change the color of paint or whatever.
Yeah, our intent would be to pre-market them.
Okay,
Yep.
and then the other going to have a homeowners association to take care of the grounds, do the snow removal, the mowing. Is that kind of what the intentions are on this project?
Yes.
Or until the thing is completed?
Well, our intent, there's 18 units, we do it in 3 phases.
Okay,
And so the undeveloped ground would be maintained by myself as a developer. The units that, as they sell, would be maintained by the people that, or well,
Okay.
by the association. But
Well,
as it is in any development that's association maintained, the developer covers the maintenance costs until the units sell.
okay. Thank you. With Patty, oh, go ahead.
Knowing that the plan is to have it be fees are included in that price point, or if that would be above the price point.
So when we put the proposal back, I think it was late 2018, we proposed a $75 a month association fee for, snow removal, yard care, common area maintenance. So these units will essentially be sold as condominium units, with the common ground outside of their unit being part of the association. And we've talked to South Dakota Housing Authority, and that is eligible for this type of project, is eligible for funds.
And that $75 would be on top of the house, like the price points that we saw in the slide. Would that be on top of those dollars, or would that be included in that amount?
I believe that would be on top of it.
On top of it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Patty and I were on the same bus on a tour in Nashville, one of the National League City Tours, and we went past a development that the person that was leading this said, this is one of our most successful projects, and it was blocks of this. I want to say there was 6 or 7 square blocks of something like this, and we went, oh gosh, this would be awesome. And it's pretty cool to see this come to fruition in our own town. It was very successful there, and I'm sure it will be here. These look pretty. I mean, if they look anything like the conceptual, it's going to be a definite upgrade in the neighborhood in that end there. So, Councilmember Wendell.
Thank you, Mayor. To the association fees, or whatever planning happens around maintenance or consideration on association, that's something I kind of want us to continue to talk about in reference to this development and affordable housing in general. I think an additional $75 a month cost to a family that might be attracted to affordable housing and be considering their monthly budget seems a little counterintuitive to me. And so I just want us to keep having conversation around that. I understand the concern of wanting to have it be maintained uniformly. Obviously, if you buy a home and then you have to buy a lawnmower, that's also an additional cost. So I'm sure we're balancing that out. I just want us to keep having conversation around an association cost tied to affordable housing neighborhoods. There's something in my mind that maybe doesn't connect to that all that well, but I understand that I might be thinking of it incorrectly.
One comment on that too is I think we sometimes forget, and I kind of did until you started talking, Councilmember Wendell, is typically with that association fee, that also includes your property taxes for the common area. But that might be something that, maybe could propose, we work with the county on projects like this, that maybe they can get a discounted tax break or something on a workforce housing project for a certain period of time, to see if that's something they would be open to, or if they can even do it by state law, if it would allow. But
I'll try to, and I'm going to have to kind of pull it from way back, but if I remember right, when we proposed this the last time, you got to keep in mind, just to your point, it's all about affordability. So we were trying to back into 30% of the income going towards housing, and their monthly payment, including their mortgage and the association fee, was less than 30% of the 80% of median income. So it did hit the target affordability even with the association fee included, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's helpful context.
The other challenge, I think when we started the project, our intent wasn't to do association maintain, because just to your point, affordability, but with the garages in the back, to not make them look like your typical row houses, you have that common drive lane in the back. Well, that's got to be maintained by someone. So how do you differentiate, if you were to just maintain your space, no one follows that, because that's going to be a private drive. So there's some challenges there without having an association.
Councilmember Tilton Burn.
I just wanted to echo the sentiments of wanting to be really mindful of any association fees, because that is why I asked the question about it, because I do think that $75 could be meaningful for a family that is looking for a home like this one. And I think that if there are ways that we can even mitigate a $75 a month cost, I think that would be helpful. Obviously, if it is helpful to know that the $75 still helps us meet that 30% number, because I do think that is what the intention and the goal is for the affordable housing. But if there are ways that we can even try and mitigate that further, I think creative ideas working with the county would be great to explore, because as affordable as we could make these, I think would be kind of the goal here, even if we can kind of come even lower.
Yeah. Just
Go ahead, James.
And as we're talking this through, things just keep coming. It's been a while. The other challenge with not making these into condominium units, and they're owning their entire space and they maintaining their area. You look at the water and sewer into these buildings. So if it's a 3-unit building, we would have to put in 3 separate services into each building, as opposed to if it's a condominium construction, we can bring in one sewer, water and sewer service to service that building. So It's a savings of about $2,500 to $3,000 a unit. So there was some thought put into that process. I get the argument about association fees, but we'll take another look at it. But it was talked about.
Councilmember Bacon.
I think it's just, and like you said, part of it's just refreshing our memory. It's been a long time since this was developed. But when we look at developing the homeowner education, I think that it's key. I know we had to do this with Habitat for Humanity, is to help them understand those fees and possibly encourage them to set up a savings account that, you know, so that they're setting aside that money to make sure that they have it when those fees are due. So I think it's just, and maybe partnering with Habitat might help because they've already got a curriculum for homeowner education that we could at least look at as a starting point when we get ready, you know, for that piece.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
So the next item on our agenda tonight is the bioretention area. Robin Butterboss, Sustainability Council Member, will introduce this item.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Council, for the opportunity. And I also want to extend additional thanks to Paul and Jake and Dusty, the Parks Department, and the City Engineering Office for their assistance in making this project possible. I really appreciate that, and I'm excited to see how it develops and what happens in the future. So a little bit of background about this project. This is, and it was the kind of depression between the two parking lots. It's a bioretention basin, and those basins are designed to help mitigate some of the stormwater issues that you see due to increased impervious surfaces from development in communities. So impervious surfaces are things like roads, roofs, parking lots, and all of those structures, those hard surfaces, don't allow rainwater to infiltrate into the soil as it would typically in a more natural situation. So this increased precipitation runoff, you know, forms an issue with the storm sewers. And so the more that we can increase the infiltration and green infrastructure in our communities will help with mitigate some of those stormwater issues. So green stormwater infrastructure like this bioretention basin uses plants and soil to reduce the runoff and contaminants. It does this by slowing the water down, allowing it to infiltrate into the soil where it is located, and then filtering some of those pollutants out of the water from the parking lots and things like that. And the plants are a huge part of that just because the native plants especially are adapted to our area. They have extremely deep roots, and then they can filter more water, then they can infiltrate more water from the soil and reduce the amount of total volume of water that enters the storm system. So the goal of this project, and this project is part of a larger design portfolio that I'm doing for my graduate work at Sdsu as part of the Ecology and Natural Resources Management Department. So this is just one of a couple of different projects that I'm doing, and my main focus of these projects is to integrate more native plants into suburban and urban landscaping. So as I mentioned, the project site just south of the building was actually a residential site, and then now with the city building and the parking lots there, it's become an impervious surface. The current site, including both parking lots on the east and the west side, is about 23,000 square feet. And so this is just a rough calculation done to see how much runoff actually is generated in what you would consider maybe a small area. So with a 1-inch rainfall, both of those parking lots have the potential to have 14,000 gallons of water that would go into that stormwater system. The site prior to this project was, as you can see, just a grassy site. It does have an outlet drain on the south side, but a lot of that water just runs through the green space. It doesn't sink into the soil, and as you can see, the soil was kind of hard. It was kind of clayey, and the water was just ponding for a longer period of time than you would want to see there. So when you factor in a full year's worth of rain, on average here in South Dakota, that detention basin has the potential to have 364,000 gallons of runoff per year moving through there. So as much as we can kind of slow that runoff down and decrease the peak flow and the total volume, then it will be beneficial for our storm sewers. And if we can increase projects like this around, then we'll have a good chance of kind of mitigating some of the stormwater issues that we see. So a little bit about the design of the system. I worked with the Landscape Architecture Department and the Ag and Biosystems Engineering Department for this design. I'm more on the plant side of things, and then they're more on the engineering side of things. So as you can see, there is a kind of a U-shaped stone berm on the south side, and that is kind of guarding the outlet drain so that more water can pond behind that berm. That will help slow the water down and allow it more time to sink into the soil. So the overall purpose, as I mentioned, is to capture more stormwater runoff from the parking lots, infiltrate it into the soil, and then if there is excess water, it won't flood the parking lot. It will go down into that storm outlet. As I mentioned, the earth berm slows the water down. It decreases the peak volume. The stone channel that you see there has an underdrain pipe, or kind of what you would consider a drain tile. So we don't want the water to pond for a long period of time. I mean, we can have issues with mosquitoes and other things like that. So the water will pond, allow it to sink into the soil, but then after a certain amount of time, as it drains down, it will go into that outlet pipe and then go into the storm sewer. The area is planted. You can see that it's mulched there, and in this picture I have just kind of the orange kind of marked out areas for the different plantings. We utilize all native plants around the channel. These plants utilize the water to increase the infiltration. They can prevent erosion and stabilize the soil because of their deep roots. They can filter some of the contaminants and pollutants from the parking lot. As I mentioned, prevent erosion. And one of the great things about this project is that it can also increase biodiversity and the aesthetic appeal of this area. So part of the planting design that I did was to make sure that we have the right plants for the right area. So the area closest to the stone channel has plants that are more water tolerant. Things like the blue flag iris that you see there. We also have some different sedge species that are more water or wetland type plants, and some rushes. They're shorter. And then we have, as we move up the perimeter, we have plants that can tolerate some moisture, but also can be happy in drier conditions as well. Things like obedient plant, lead plant, big blue stem. And then on the perimeter, we have plants that are more tolerant of dry conditions. We have some asters and some butterfly milkweed, things like that. So these are just some pictures of the installation process. The prep work, the site work was actually done by a contracted company. I think it was Carey's Landscaping. So they were the ones who kind of subcontracted the city itself to do a lot of this preparation work. They dug the trench, they installed the underdrain pipe, they laid down all of the gravel and sprayed the area to get rid of weeds, and then laid down all the mulch. And from that point on, I kind of took over with the planting, and I had a lot of help from the landscape architecture students as well. We planted about over 500 plants there, I think, and we may fill in a few more here as we go. So the overall objectives of this project are to increase the awareness and the benefits of green stormwater infrastructure projects like this. And a big part of what I'm interested in doing is highlighting the beauty and the functionality of native plants. Native plants are very important for our native butterflies, pollinators, birds, and they're also a really important part of our ecosystem and our natural heritage here in South Dakota, and really wherever you live. So I'd also like to provide more education and outreach about this project, both about the planting and the actual design of the bioretention basin. We are working on a sign at the site. It will be informational about the structure of the bioretention basin, how it functions, and then about the plants that are there as well. And I'd also like to put on a workshop for the public and whoever else is interested about how the bioretention garden works and how we can incorporate green stormwater infrastructure practices like this on both large and small scales at your home. So this bioretention basin kind of sounds official, but another term for it that people might recognize in their home landscape would be more of a rain garden. So there's a lot of opportunities for rain gardens on kind of a home scale as well. And I just, again, want to thank the city, the Sdsu departments, and I had a little bit of help. Also, my son helped me do some planting as well, so his name is up there too. Yeah. Well, I think he was pretty willing to come and help. He helped dig some holes and plant some trees. So does anybody have any questions about the project?
Thank you, Robin. Is there any questions or comments? Councilmember Bacon.
My two favorite topics are here tonight. I'm thrilled about this. One question I have, I'm assuming it wouldn't have been possible in the budget this first go around, but have you looked at or considered, I know as I've studied other projects like this, where they break up the parking lot a little bit and put some rainwater garden type things in the parking lot to help slow it down even more. Did you look at that possibility?
Not for this project, no. We just didn't want to disturb what was already just built. There are a lot of different green stormwater infrastructure practices that can be incorporated, especially in new designs. There are lots of different kind of buffer strips and, you know, depressions on the edges of parking lots on smaller scales. So in all of the different median areas, you can have areas where you can be capturing stormwater. Things like green roofs and, you know, smaller scale rain gardens are also definitely possible. Bioswales, as well as the more traditional detention and retention basins.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember Brink.
This is an absolutely fantastic project. I'm really excited to continue to watch it literally grow. Thank you for the work that you've done and the team of individuals have done to make this possible. You mentioned that there's going to be signage. Will that be at the location? I don't know if, Paul, this is a question for you or for Robin.
Yep. I'm working with a graphic design student who is going to be coming up with the design and helping with all of the formatting of the sign. So I've been working with Dusty and Jake in the city about getting that sign completed. We should have it up and out there by later this spring.
Great. As someone who pretty intentionally plants native species in my own yard, I am not an expert in native species, and so I sometimes struggle to know what plants to plant and where to get access to those plants. I don't know if through the signage, if there's the possibility of listing a website, creating a QR code, something like that, that people can kind of take a snapshot, or maybe there's handouts that we can put along with the signage so that people who want to replicate something small like a rain garden in their yard could then find more information so that they can do so. Because I would love to see more of this happening. I would love to see us do more of this with the city land as well. And I also wonder, is there any goal or intention for us to study what the impact of this rain garden is having on the stormwater that we see in that area out here?
Okay, well, yes, that's a lot of, I can address all of those things actually. So as part of my graduate work, I'm working with the Native Plant Initiative at Sdsu, and they are kind of a subsidiary of the university. They're kind of a standalone, but they're working to increase education and outreach regarding native plants in our area. So they have a plant sale each year, but this year, part of my work is actually marketing and working on distributing plants to greenhouses and nurseries more locally, because it is really difficult to find native plants. Usually you can see some echinaceas or some things like that at the regular nurseries, but a lot of times those are cultivars and not the straight native varieties. There's some debate about whether or not they're still quite as beneficial as the true natives are. So getting the straight native varieties out instead of some of those cultivars is really important. Most of the time you have to order those plants and seeds online, and places like Prairie Moon Nursery, they sell out right away in the spring. So if you don't know what you're getting in January, then you're kind of out of luck. So yeah, our goal is to grow and distribute more plants through the Native Plant Initiative as well. And we do have kind of a website and a QR code and things like that. So I'm going to be working on that some more this spring. Let's see, what was the second part of your question?
About studying
Oh,
the
yes.
plot?
Okay. We are doing some hydrologic monitoring, and that's part of what Dr. John McMain through the Ag and Biosystems Engineering Department is going to be doing. So they have some monitoring equipment that they're going to be installing in the outlet of that pipe that's on the south side. And so they can actually monitor the outflow of the water. So what will be really interesting to do is see how the water that is entering the storm system changes over time as the plants really grow. Because right now they're just really tiny, but as the roots develop and the plants get bigger, it will be really interesting to see if the amount of water that enters the storm system is going to be decreased. So,
Well, thank you so much. This is really exciting, and I'm just very excited to see it grow.
yeah, thanks.
Councilmember Brink.
First of all, just thank you. This is a great project, and I'm very excited also to see it grow. I've walked by there a few different times, and it's just a very cool thing. I do think education for the community is one of the biggest aspects of this that's important, and that education has to be not only for the people who are just interested in growing local plants, but also for our developer community too. And so I'm very interested in whatever this group can do and your group can do to continue that momentum and making sure that this information is out there. I'm kind of curious, and I know that this is probably a one-off. This particular rain garden is done for illustrative purposes and to kind of be a showcase. But if it's appropriate, what do you think about the financial aspect of something like this in terms of, if someone is going to develop let's say a big box store and there's going to be a parking lot, how burdensome is it to put something like this into someone's development plans?
I don't actually know all about the financial costs. Depending on the size and the square footage, there's different ways that you can seed a rain garden as opposed to transplanting plants that might make it a little bit more cost effective. This is actually a very intentional kind of block style planting design. If you do a more naturalistic design, you can actually just put seed down and then do some targeted transplanting. So that would help decrease the cost a little bit. Obviously, there's going to be some costs for the actual engineering and digging, excavating of the site. But overall, considering how much rainwater can be kind of harvested in a system like this and prevented from entering, already taxed storm systems, I don't know whether it's the developer or the city or who's going to be kind of reaping the most benefits. It's probably not necessarily the developer or the store if it's a big box store, long term. So that's something that probably needs to be worked out as well. But from an ecosystem standpoint and from an overall environmental health and sustainability standpoint, I think these systems are going to become increasingly necessary.
I can answer some of that. Having been in other communities that had policies that required that type of development for big box commercial development, there's usually a trade-off there. Rather than having more concrete, you have more landscaping. A lot of these landscapings are developed with perennials that require a lot less maintenance. But though every 10 years or so, you got to go back in there and renovate some of these areas. But also a lot of these communities will have stormwater fees associated with it too. And so there's some give and take there. We're doing the stormwater master plan. Before it was more about quantity, slowing down the quantity of water. Now it's more about quality, making sure that the water that's going into the system, going to our neighbors, is well taken care of. And so thinking about the perspective of the environment, you can start looking at what's called an ERU, equivalent residential unit, is something that we're looking at with this plan. And there's give and take, so you can get credits. Rather than paying your monthly or annual fee, you could reduce that by implementing some of these measures. So there's give and takes and ways in which you can work with commercial developers. One thing I would note, this is a fantastic project with Sdsu. It's one of many that we've been exploring over the past year or two with their engineering department and other departments as much as possible. Now, Robin, you've done a fantastic job with this project, but it's a spinoff of discussions we had about a year ago where Sdsu came and presented, did analysis of all our parks departments. I believe you and Dusty are working on other similar type projects throughout our community. Can you give council kind of a little insight into what those are?
Sure. I have another project at the nature park that I'm going to be working on this spring and summer as well, and that's the area that is on the eastern side to the south of the Outdoor Adventure Center. So between those two parking lot areas, there's another kind of depression, or I don't know if it really captures some of the parking lot runoff, but I don't know if you call it a detention basin at this point. So yeah, I'm going to be working on that site, doing some similar plantings, probably not so much of a designed planting as more of a naturalistic planting, doing some seeding and then some different design elements to that, but it is going to be more of a natural design there. Yep. And so, as far as my graduate requirements go, my time is limited, but I'm always, hoping to help encourage and provide education and as much help as I can to the city if they want to be implementing more of these projects. So,
Councilmember Wendell.
Actually, my question was that, or Paul just addressed what I was going
Okay.
to ask.
All right. Councilmember Collins.
I had a question for Paul, maybe. Those policies that you were talking about, can we get our hands on those, kind of take a look at what those are? And did that seem to help companies coming in, or was it a burden for some, you think, or?
You'll see it as part of the Stormwater Master Plan. That's underway. So you'll see those policies come to council through multiple public meetings. What I can tell you is that a lot of companies nationwide are used to these things. A lot of communities are accepting them, especially East Coast, West Coast, and as you get closer and closer. Minnesota, I know Nebraska, Kansas, they've all adopted similar statewide policies. I know we have some here, but they're not as strictly followed. I'll say that kind of lightly. But there are opportunities. And so a lot of these businesses, especially those from out of town, are working with engineering firms to incorporate things like this, whether there's policies or there's not. A lot of them are very conscious about their impact to the environment.
Thank you. Yeah, this is great. I wish we could do this all over town and have you help us with that. But yeah, hopefully we'll see more of this in the future.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councilmember Bacon, I think you had a comment or a question yet?
We'll see if I can remember all of them. First of all, there's a wonderful book out there called The Guide to Greening Cities. So if you want to learn more about these kinds of projects and what other cities are doing and the kinds of things we can do, from rainwater gardens in our own boulevards and our own private property, which is a huge way that we as private individuals could help. We could maybe have a contest on rainwater garden boulevards and see who can do the most attractive designs. Would be fun. As far as native plants, Holly, you had asked, there are a number of us in the community who very intentionally are growing native plants, and we're gardeners, and gardeners share. So I think maybe getting the word out and, maybe putting a list together of people who would, come springtime, we all need to divide our plants because our gardens get overgrown. So I think we can start helping that way as well. Plus, that's another way to engage community members in the process and get them to buy into what we're doing. And the third one I have forgotten for now. So, but I'm excited.
All right. Quite a presentation, and I think we've learned a lot, and I hope the community embraces this mentality, and we move on from there. I'm looking forward to the irises blooming.
yeah, thank you very much.
That was my favorite flower in that whole bunch. So
Well, they're not like your maybe traditional irises. It's a northern smaller, but I mean,
Right.
a lot of these native plants, you don't necessarily think of them as kind of the biggest, showiest plants, similar to some of your annuals. But once you kind of get more used to them, they have an appeal all of their own, and you just kind of have to learn to, appreciate all of the different aspects of them. So thank you very much.
thank you, Robin. Item on here is Economic Impact Report. Daniel Scholl from Vice President, Research and Development from Sdsu, will present.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name is Daniel Scholl. I reside in Brookings. I'm Vice President for Research and Economic Development, with the emphasis on economic development tonight at Sdsu. We hear over the years repeatedly quite a lot about universities and other institutions of higher education having an economic impact in their communities. We were pleased this last summer to participate in a Regental system-wide study of the fiscal year 2019 economic impact of each institution. And we have done some of our own studies, a study as well that I had previously given council several months ago, bits and pieces of in an entirely different context. And having these numbers, we felt it important to share these with various stakeholder bodies in our community. Recently, we had the privilege of presenting these data to the our leader roundtable, which led to ultimately the opportunity to present to you this evening. And so I'll start with a slide that points out 5 highlights, and then the subsequent slides will go into a bit more detail on each of these, and hopefully that'll leave us plenty of time to answer whatever questions you might have, or questions you have that I have to go find the answers to. I am not the economic modeler. I'm just talking about what they have done. So 5 points. First of all, overall, in FY19, the total economic impact of Sdsu was $936 million. Student spending had an estimated, as a subset of that, had an estimated impact of $78.5 million, and research itself had an impact, and that's my area of responsibility, of $104.5, rounding $105 million in FY19. During that same time, state and local tax revenue generated by the economic activities associated with the university amounted to $32 million. And then the number that just kind of is a take your breath away kind of number, and I'll have to explain this when we get to that slide, total economic impact of alumni, and I have to give you some qualifiers of that, is $100.8 billion. So now, diving into the numbers, and I have a handout that I'll pass around to you after I've finished going through these slides. So first of all, the study itself. This was one of a series of 3 studies done between 2010 and 2019, with the study in the middle being in 2016, commissioned by the Board of Regents. The first 2, in 2010 and 2016, were conducted by USD using a REMI model, and that's a brand name of a economic estimation model. And the last one, the one that we're presenting specifically, used the more widely known IMPLAN model and was conducted by a consultancy named Parker Phillips. What we saw during that period is that estimated economic impact increased 22% over those 9 years. But there are some differences in the models, but you see the general trend is the same. The estimates are consistent with one another. So that total economic impact of $936 million can be broken down into 3 types of economic effects. So the first type is what I would normally think of as economic impact. That's the direct economic impact, and that comes from purchasing goods and services in the process of conducting university business. So paying people, buying services, people come to Brookings to visit with their student or to attend an athletic event, and they make direct purchases. So that's what this figure is. Indirect are the purchases that are made to support the direct purchases. So, for example, if I buy a pencil at the bookstore has to buy that pencil from somebody else. So it's value chain supply type economic effects. So that comprises $167 million of the $936 million total. The induced economic impact of nearly $200 million is the economic impact that occurs when people who receive value, such as in compensation, so like when I receive a paycheck, I go and do something with that. My family does something with that. That's the induced economic impact. So you could call that secondary economic impact. Another way to divide up the $936 million of estimated economic impact in FY 2019 is in operations spending, research, visitor spending, and so forth. So operations accounted for $836 million. Student spending itself accounted for $78 million. Visitor spending, so this is obviously of importance to a community like Brookings, amounted to $22 million. And all of that, just to give you an anchor point, all of that is in the context of our FY19 State General Fund budget appropriated to SDSU specifically was $68.4 million. Not a bad return on investment. Looking more specifically at student impact. If you take the entire $936 million of estimated economic impact and divide it by our student enrollment during that same year, 11,500 students, that equates to a little over $81,000 per student. Now, that's not saying that each student has an impact of $81,000, but that gives you kind of a per person point of reference or a way to look at that. But student spending outside of SDSU operations itself was estimated to amount to $78.5 million of impact. Now, that isn't necessarily restricted to Brookings, but it is the estimated state and local impact. Another study, and this is a study I was referring to earlier that we conducted internally 2 years ago with academic year 2019 and 2020 data, estimated that an increase or a decrease in 100 students would add or subtract $2.6 million in value add to the state and local economy. So I'm concentrating, looking at the table on this slide, I'm concentrating on the column second from the right. And so that's divided, that $2.6 million is divided again into direct, indirect, and induced effects. The reason I'm concentrating on that column instead of the total sales column, which is a larger figure, is because there's some duplication in the total sales column. So using the pencil example again, if a student buys a pencil downtown and the vendor, the retailer downtown bought that pencil from a supplier also in Brookings, the value of the pencil, the core value of the pencil is counted twice. So there's duplication in those numbers. Whereas the value add is the way that it's calculated provides a more accurate estimate of economic impact. You can also look at these numbers in terms of the direct spend of students off campus. So that's not for university food plans and housing and so forth at a little less than $9,000 per student annually. Now, turning our attention to the next highlight of economic impact, and that is research. Research, which of course is near and dear to my heart, that's how we create new knowledge and innovation on which new things, especially new businesses, are built. In FY19, we conducted $68 million of research activity at SDSU. So that's activity funded by external grants and contracts and by other sources of funds. That research is conducted at sites around the state of South Dakota, many places around the state of South Dakota, especially on main campus, and I'll point out too, in the lands that SDSU owns and controls, utilizes north of campus, much of that is for purposes, directly or indirectly, of research. And that research, which cost in direct expenditures $67 million, generated another $105 million of economic impact during FY19. 59 million of that direct and the remainder indirect. And then that supports an estimated 600 jobs during that same period. To give you an idea of the pathway of these types of research expenditures impacting the economy, so innovation, patentable or protectable innovation is one of those pathways. From the period FY17 to FY21, SDSU received, or SDSU faculty and students declared 100 or disclosed 127 inventions. During that same period, 12 patents were issued and 25 different license agreements were signed with companies, which is an indicator of the private sector valuing, in a business sense, valuing these innovations. One of the pathways by which that happens, I've highlighted on the right, something that's occurred just very recently in Brookings, and that is the groundbreaking for the Poet Bioproducts Institute. So the Poet Bioproducts Institute, which will be built for an approximate price tag of $30 million, will serve as a laboratory by which innovative bioprocesses, a specific type of manufacturing, can be tested and scaled up to commercial scale levels. So going from the laboratory bench, which is very small containers, small capacities, to tens of thousands of gallons at a time, those are not trivial changes. That's not a trivial scale up to be able to go from the laboratory to commercial production of a new bioproduct. This laboratory will provide a means of testing each of those scale-up steps, enabling SDSU and its university partners to push more innovations into the economy, into the marketplace. And we're partnering with South Dakota School of Mines and Technology. This could have landed in Rapid City. I'm glad it's here. An example of that process that I've just described, Prairie Aquatech, a story that most, if not all of you, are very familiar with already. Starting back several years ago, before I arrived at SDSU in 2011, a research center utilizing $2.5 million of state funds for research made a discovery. Over time, that research was supplemented with another $20 million of external funds secured and brought in, and a bioprocessing technology was invented, patented, a company was created that licensed it, that's Prairie Aquatech, and now Prairie Aquatech has a $100 million plus production facility in Volga, South Dakota, has 60 employees, and they're selling their product on every continent except one. So that's an example, and that's an awesome success story. And you go through a lot of technologies to get one story like that, but that's an example of how it works. Turning now to state and local taxes generated by the economic activity associated with the university. Those tax revenues were estimated to be $32 million, $31.6 million in FY19. And that's the combined effect of student spending, employee spending, and related, the spending of related constituencies, such as students, families, et cetera. Those come from nearly $17.5 million of direct spending, nearly $5.5 million of that value chain indirect effect, and then over $8 million of spending generating tax revenues because people used the money that they were compensated with for their work. Another way to divide these numbers that's particularly relevant for us this evening is between state impact and county and sub-county, or county and city impact. And those fall out nearly 50-50, 15.7 million of state taxes generated, 15.9 of county and sub-county taxes generated. And then finally, that alumni number. So first of all, alumni, there are two things we do at the university. We create knowledge, we create new knowledge, that's the research. We disseminate that knowledge, and that's the education. And when you disseminate knowledge through education, you're transferring that knowledge and that technology forever. People walk away with knowledge and understanding in their minds, and they use it over and over and over again. Last year, or in 2019, we graduated 2,600 students. Overall, about 52% not about, 52% of our living alumni are in South Dakota. That's over 36,000 alumni. If you estimate the career earnings over a 40-year career of each of those people up to FY19, that sums to $100.8 billion of earnings, with a $4.5 billion tax impact over that same period, and over 600,000 jobs subsequently supported. Okay, those are big, take your breath away kind of numbers, but they give you a sense of the longer term economic effect of education. And I think that's a really important concept to end on, because that's what we do. That's why I love my job, in fact. So with that, Mr. Mayor, if there's still time, I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stoll. Any questions or comments? Councilmember Bacon.
It's always good for us to be reminded of the impact that this university has on our community. But one of the areas that I have a question on, I used to serve on our utilities board, and certain of these entities use a lot of utilities like water. I think Prairie Aqueduct might be one of the examples. Have we taken a look at the impact on those resources and how that impacts our community long term?
There's a negative impact of
Yeah.
using the resources. I don't have, this
Okay.
study did not do that.
Yeah.
And I certainly don't have
I just think it's
that.
something we want to look at to balance out the whole thing, but this is very excellent information for us to have on the economic piece.
And,
So
and your
thank
point
you.
is very well taken. This is one part of the whole. There are other considerations in how
Yes.
we use resources.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
You had referenced spending per student, and I think it was like $8,800 annually. I assume that was specific to SDSU students in Brookings. I'm guessing you don't have this off the top of your head, but I'm curious how that compares to other university communities in South Dakota. I think we pride ourselves on engaging with our students, finding opportunities for them to shop downtown and patronize our businesses, and somewhat linked probably to visitor spending as well. But I'm kind of curious if we are engaging our students as well as other university communities in the state. Not that spending is the only way to measure our level of engagement, but it might be one indicator of what the student experience in Brookings looks like relative to other university communities in the state.
I will access the data that I can of other institutions' sub-report to try to get at that. I'm not sure I'll be able to, but I do think that's an interesting question. I'll try to get at that.
Thank you.
And so we risk that we'll find either our students are spendthrifts or they're really, really tight.
Well, it would be hard to determine what exactly the cause is of any deviation, but I'm curious. So, thank you.
I'll try to see if I can get into that.
Just one more, that is the employment they provide for our community. We have a lot of student employees, which is a real positive impact on our community. So you may not have that data now, but it might be something you want to start looking at for the
Thank you.
future.
Councilmember Tilton Burn.
So my question was actually on that. Do we have a sense or an idea of how many students hold jobs in addition to being students? Obviously, their first job is to be a student and to study, but do we have an idea of how many students are employed? Or I don't know if that's even data we can capture.
I think that data does exist. I don't have it, but I know where to start asking. So I'll look into that.
Councilmember Brink.
Appreciate your always good information. I'm curious if you happen to know any more details on, I think it was the 7th slide of your presentation tonight, the figures on SDSU students generating approximately $15 million towards state tax and county tax, that distribution between the two entities. I was just curious if that roughly 50-50 split with other universities across the state as well? Would that ratio be approximately the same? And if you, I'm thinking that the county, the state tax in those calculations, probably sales tax and mostly sales tax, some property tax.
Right. Yeah. And so the details, and so I'm speaking off the top
Yep.
of my head, so the details, some of the details that would account for the split between the two levels of jurisdiction would be the size of the homeowner pool in the economic sphere of the university because of the property. You're the one who gave me the idea of that by mentioning property tax. Otherwise, the rest in our environment would be sales tax.
Okay, any
I'm curious to know, in these numbers, does the actual cost of tuition play into this? Where does that land? Because that obviously has a great impact. Where is the impact of that kind of in the number breakdown here?
So tuition will be in the figures of total operations of the university. For the student spending figures, that is in addition to tuition. That's off-campus spending. So that's not a precise answer, but it's approximate. Mr. Mayor, may I distribute these handouts?
Thank you, Daniel. Great. I guess while you're doing that, I guess a comment that I would make, and obviously the impact that I'm thinking about is the quality of life impact that SDSU brings to our community and how our community integrates with that as far as diversity, the possibilities of improvement upon everybody's life because SDSU is here, all the way from the cultural events to the sports events that are here, what students bring as far as how do I want to say it, impacting our community and how it changes how we look at things in our community versus towns that don't have a university. I think this makes an impact on most towns that do have a university. I think we're fortunate to have SDSU and that it is a land grant company or country college and all of the diverse aspects that it brings to our community. So Holly, go ahead.
I just want to say I think you have a really valid point there, and I do is the presentation we saw just before this. It's very possible that we would not have had a rain garden take place if it weren't for the efforts. I mean, obviously the team that put that together was a student pursuing their higher education team members from SDSU, and so I think examples like that also show kind of the additional benefits that we receive by being able to partner with a university that's right here in our backyard. So in far beyond any dollars that we see, there's additional value there in the projects that we're able to partner on. So I think you're spot on.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Scholl. Review items for the next February 22nd meeting, stated meeting that we have. We've got a few items on consent agenda. We have SDSU report. There will be a proclamation on National Kidney Month. We've got 3 contracts and change orders to look at. We have 1 first reading as of right now. Budget amendment number 2 for the 2022 budget. Let's see, and then progress report. They always look forward to progress report from our assistant city manager. Is there any other topics or concerns that the council wants to bring up? Entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.